Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. It was said earlier today during the live broadcast of the Opetaia versus David Nyika fight that Skye Nicolson would be returning in March in her native Australia against Tiara Brown. The location of the fight has not been decided yet. It's supposed to be on the undercard of George Cambodia's Matchroom debut.
I thought it was going to be a unification match with Nina Menka.
I guess not. And as a result of that, she's fighting her mandatory challenger instead. Her mandatory challenger, Tiara Brown, who's set to see action one more time before that showdown with Skye. Later on this month, in Pennsylvania, opposite the ring veteran journeywoman, Calista Silgado.
Tiara should win that fight. Calista Silgado is tantamount to a professional opponent. Just the fighter you pay to get some rounds in. She's not there to win.
Sporting a professional record of 22 wins with 17 losses and 4 draws, that tells the story to Tiara's unblemished record of 17-0. Both 36 years old, but with different ceilings. Tiara Brown really is one of the more talented fighters in the featherweight division. She has been, and she's about to get her shot at the big time. All she's got to do is make it past Calista, then she can get her hands on Skye.
Skye, who has less professional fights than Tiara Brown, and less time in the paid ranks, but has made substantial progress, leaps and bounds. And that's the difference between having a major promotional outfit behind you and not having a major outfit behind you.
7 years younger than Tiara Brown. Skye is 29, where Tiara is 36. Skye is a southpaw, where Tiara is an orthodox fighter. Skye, who is best described as a defensively minded, mobile, pure boxer, where Tiara is more boxer-puncher and the stronger puncher of the two. A recorded 11 knockouts across 17 professional bouts. She can punch.
The caveat is that power only counts as much as your ability to deliver it, your ability to land. And Skye Nicolson has become an increasingly difficult fighter to land a punch on.
I'm not a fan of her base style, but I'd be lying to you if I told you she wasn't talented. I'd be lying to you if I told you she's not effective with that base style. She's very good. Coming off the most productive year of her boxing career, she saw herself become a world champion in April of last year opposite the ring former champion Sarah Mahfoud, capped it off with 2 successful title defenses against Diana Vargas and unbeaten Raven Chapman.
Unbeaten Tiara Brown is next.
In what will be Skye's 3rd defense of the WBC title against a fighter who's wanted to get her in the ring for a very long time now, 2 years by my count. Tiara has been calling out Skye Nicolson for a fight since before she picked up the WBC title, way before she actually became a champion, to a point where I wondered if it was even prudent. Why is someone who's been around as long as Tiara calling out a prospect?
Well, she's not a prospect anymore. She's a bona fide world champion, and she's got to defend her belt. That's the way it is.
They both had productive years last year. Skye Nicolson saw action 3 times. Tiara saw action 2 under the OTX banner, OTX, that has a broadcast deal with DAZN. Her next fight is going to be under the Cohen Promotions banner. Cohen, that's Kaylee Reese, that's Brian Cohen.
That's where it's going down, and she should win. She should make it past Calista Silgado to have that showdown with Skye.
Just a refresher, what I think that fight is going to look like. I think Tiara is going to be the aggressor. I think Skye's going to be the defender, circling away, moving laterals, sticking that jab out there, those long levers that Skye Nicolson's got. In terms of speed, I think Skye's got more of it, and that's going to make a difference. Skye's got speed, and Tiara's got power.
Skye's speed will offset Tiara's power. Tiara will struggle to land those power shots. those power punches. I anticipate Sky's going to be very careful with Tiara, moving and pot-shotting safely from the outside.
Because the fight is set to go down in Australia, I don't imagine the judges are going to appreciate Tiara's work, even if she does have some success. That's just the reality of boxing and organized sports in general. Home field advantage is a real thing, and Sky's going to have it. Being honest, I think Tiara Brown needs a knockout to win. A knockout to win in Australia, and I don't trust that she can get it being the slower, older fighter at 36 years old.
Sorry.
I don't think it's going to work out for Tiara. Not in Australia, and not against Sky, who, whether you like her or not, she's very effective with that base style. Not always entertaining, but definitely efficient. And Tiara Brown may be the next unbeaten fighter that Sky Nicolson gives their first professional loss.
First look, Sky Nicolson on points is the pick.
Don't bet against the Aussie. Now, in the main event of that broadcast, we saw Jai Opetaia successfully defend his IBF title against late replacement David Nyika of New Zealand. A very big boy as far as cruiserweights go.
In a fight that got off to a fast start right there in the first round, it didn't take long for both boys to let their hands go. Jai Opetaia, the smaller, more compact fighter of the two, was the aggressor, closing the distance and trying for big punches early.
David Nyika, the taller, albeit greener fighter of the two, did his best to assert himself and weather the storm. Exchanges mid-range to inside where Jai had the advantage in the first round. Short hooks, heavy ones in the closing moments of the first round going into the second. More of the same from Jai in the second, closing the distance. But David Nyika, to his credit, did a halfway decent job of asserting himself, letting his hands go and trying for punches.
Trying his best. So Jai Opetaia regularly closing the distance and getting off meaty punches, meaty shots mid-range to inside where he had the advantage, at least in this fight, against the taller, longer fighter with longer arms who needs more room for those longer arms to work.
Jai wouldn't give him that, staying on him like a cheap suit, getting off short hooks upstairs and body shots downstairs, a lot on them.
Thudding power.
In what was a spirited second round, towards the end of it, it looked like David Nyika got through with a straight shot that rattled Jai Opetaia's cage, but he weathered it and kept barreling forward, kept putting pressure on him. Though the smaller, compact fighter of the two, it looked like there was just a lot more on Jai Opetaia's punches, that he was the physically stronger fighter, albeit the smaller fighter.
Sense of impending doom in the third round as Jai Opetaia stayed with him, stayed on him, and poured it on thick, getting off combinations mid-range to inside, playing in close and staying there.
Great action for as long as the fight lasted, and once again, there were moments where David Nyika did a decent job of asserting himself towards the tail end of the round. He actually put Jai on the ropes, but Jai was still getting off the meteor punches in the exchange.
Close quarters favor the shorter fighter with the shorter arms. That's how it is.
And in this fight, that was Jai, who closed the show in the fourth in knockout fashion.
Jai scores the first knockdown of the fight in the exchange off a mammoth right uppercut that landed flush. David Nyika rises to his feet, tries to continue.
Before being knocked down again for the second and last time in the fourth round off a salvo of punches, just waves of punches from the reigning champion, who was determined to go home early. And you could see that from how he started the fight,
yes,
and how he finished it.
What David Nyika resembled as the fight progressed was an umbrella caught in a monsoon.
It took him a long time to rise to his feet. After that knockout, it took him a long time. People started to get worried.
He got up eventually.
So when this fight got announced, and I saw the tail of the tape on David Nyika, that he's a big boy, very big for a cruiserweight, what it reminded me of was the Jordan Thompson fight that Jai had. And we saw what he did to Jordan Thompson. That's how I expected this fight to end.
That's how it ended.
So that immediately after, the focus could shift to a Jai Opetaia versus Zurdo Ramirez fight, as Jai Opetaia made it clear he wants a unification match with Zurdo, who holds 2 of the 4 titles at this weight.
And that would be a different fight than this one was, because for starters, Zurdo is a lot more experienced than David Nyika, with a lot more fights and a lot more rounds in the bank. He's already fought 2 champions at this weight. Jai would be the third.
Thus, experience would be a factor. That Zurdo is a more experienced fighter than the guy that Jai just fought. He's more experienced than Jai.
More fights, more rounds in the bank against more champions across more weight classes. That's one difference.
Yet another is that Zurdo Ramirez is quite fluid. mid-range to inside. That's one of Zurdo Ramirez's sweet spots. Now, I understand that somebody watching this fight might tell themselves that Jai's too big and Jai's too strong mid-range to inside.
For Zurdo?
You have to keep in mind that while Jai Opetaia was able to deconstruct David Nyika within close quarters, Zurdo ain't David. Zurdo's good at that range. He knows how to handle himself there.
Short hooks, uppercuts, body shots, the same kind of punches that Jai Opetaia was letting go of, Zurdo can do that too. And because he's not as tall or as long as David Nyika,
he may not struggle to get off punches at that range, like David Nyika did.
Why not?
Shorter arms. Zurdo Ramirez has shorter arms than David Nyika. That makes for a quicker return in the exchange.
Quicker to pull the trigger and quicker to get the hand back.
Not telling you that you have to go with Zurdo to win the Opetaia fight. I'm just telling you that it's different. It's a different fight because Zurdo is more experienced than David Nyika and more fluid mid-range to inside. Now, power would obviously go to Jai.
Oh, he's the noticeably stronger fighter of the two.
It's almost a gift and a curse, that power, because finishing these fights early, the way that he does, is what's preventing him from going into the deeper rounds.
The later rounds.
Championship rounds, and our only memory of Jai going into the 11th or the 12th are the two Maris Briedis fights where he was noticeably tired, running out of gas.
It's a factor.
Because Zurdo has many more fights and many more rounds in the bank than Jai Opetaia does, he's been the distance more times than Jai, I think it's safe to say he might have a better engine than Jai, better cardio. Thus, Jai's best bet is to take the steam out of him, beat the fight out of him.
Kenny.
Questions that need answers. How will Zurdo Ramirez hold up against Jai Opetaia's offense, aggression? How will he receive his power? Questions that need answers. If Jai Opetaia can't get rid of Zurdo early,
Is he gonna gas out late?
because if he does, that's a problem. On the heels of today's performance, I think most people would look at Jai Opetaia as the favorite going into a Zurdo Ramirez fight. I'm just telling you that he's live in that fight.
He's got some tools.
Though before it comes to that, he seems to have a mandatory challenger of his own to satisfy in Cuba's own Uniel Dorticos, former champion.
Rumor has it that the fight between them has already been made, and it's set to go down 2 months from now in March on DAZN.
A dangerous fight with a dangerous puncher, and a tough sequence of fights for Zurdo Ramirez when you think about it. From Arsen Goulamarian, a champion, to another champion in Chris Billum Smith, to a former champion with a knockout punch in Uniel Dorticos.
That's rough.
That's a tough sequence of fights, so that if he makes it through his next one, the expectation is he's gonna fight Jai right after that.
I wouldn't hold my breath.
There's been a lot of talk about David Benavidez potentially moving up to cruiserweight for Zurdo Ramirez beyond the upcoming David Morrell fight, that if he beats David, he may not stay at light heavyweight. If you're Oscar De La Hoya, who would you prefer your cruiserweight champion fight? A hard puncher, a dangerous guy in Jai Opetaia, or a newbie to the weight in David Benavidez, one that some people are familiar with?
Jai Opetaia versus Zurdo Ramirez really is the best fight to make at cruiserweight, but I'm getting the sense we may not get that.
Not after next. So maybe who Jai Opetaia should go after is newly reinstated WBC champion Badu Jack.
I wouldn't go to the restaurant of Matchroom, PBC, or Top Rank. If this were food, I'd be looking for food elsewhere because A, PBC's charging too much for their plate. So that's a one-time thing. I'm doing that when I want to take the lady out. Top Rank, they just ain't giving me enough substance. So it's like, it's slop over and over. Slop. If it gets you filled, it satisfies you, but is you truly content? You know, Matchroom, they giving us chips and fish out the wazoo. I'm tired of all the goddamn UK fights. If you on the zone, give me some shit for an American. You got these weirdo callers, sick, Universal Sport, Global Sport. I don't want to hear that shit, my dude. Do you see America trying to sell us darts? Do we got cricket on television over here? No, the don't. You gotta know your market. Know your consumer. I am a consumer.
Nestor's gripes are an adequate reflection of how the American boxing fan might feel in this current landscape, to where a lot of what's coming out is international.
It's not centered around the United States, and it doesn't necessarily cater to a U.S. audience.
And what am I always telling you? That the U.S. boxing fan is less concerned with world boxing, less concerned with fights like Fury versus Usyk or Better Be versus Bivol, even if it is for undisputed, and even if those fights are being fought at the highest level of the sport.
If it doesn't involve Americans, then they don't care.
So perhaps the biggest problem with this is that the Americans' buying power has dwindled as of late. That if American boxing finds itself in the state that it's in now, it has everything to do with the Americans themselves. If the viewing figures for Showtime's fights, when they were in boxing, would have been better, then they would have kept them on. It's their poor viewing figures that saw them leave boxing.
Anything that accounted for less than 10% of the overall viewership on Showtime got the axe, and that wasn't exclusive to boxing. But in a nutshell, if the viewing figures in America would have been better, then they would have kept them.
And who are those viewing figures supposed to come from? They're supposed to come from the Americans. It's supposed to come from you.
Boxing fans like yourself.
And all those pay-per-views that they put on Fox, on Showtime, if they would have been more successful, maybe Fox would have stayed, maybe Showtime would have stayed, but they didn't because they weren't.
Who was supposed to buy them?
The Americans. That's who was intended to buy them, but because the Americans didn't, they saw no reason to stay in the sport. You see, American boxing finds itself in the pickle that it's in due to no one other than the Americans themselves, the American audience, and the American fighters. I mean, look at Teofimo. The fight that he was supposed to be having with Subriel Matias, that is now off.
That's one less fight that would have happened in America.
Last year, when Jaron Ennis was trying to unify titles with Brian Norman, and the Normans priced themselves out, that's one less fight that would have happened in America.
Devin Haney last year, after the Ryan Garcia fight, he had enough time to schedule another fight, but he chose to sit out. So that's one less fighter, one less fight that happened in America.
David Benavidez only fought once. Gervonta Davis only fought once.
Terrence Crawford only fought once.
A growing trend in the American boxing scene, so it's no wonder that the audience is less than receptive.
And when the audience is less than receptive, so are the promoters.
So maybe you don't care about the show that happened in Australia earlier today. That's fine. The promoter doesn't care about you.
That was for the Aussies anyway. The UK show's coming up.
Dalton Smith's upcoming fight. Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barboza. Those shows are catering to a UK audience. If you don't like them, they ain't for you anyway.
You're not a priority anymore.
That's what I'm getting at. Too many of the American fight fans enabled these fighters,
The American ones.
to make things difficult, to make fights difficult to make, to the point where big fights aren't even happening in America anymore. This is what you wanted.
Sort of.
Making a fight between two American fighters has become increasingly difficult over time, and a lot of the fight fans enable these practices,
Arguing on the behalf of their favorite fighter.
basically giving them a pass to do whatever they want, devoid of judgment. So this is what you end up with: a stagnant market and a shrinking audience for what is a niche sport, at least in this country. You feel like the promoters aren't prioritizing you? That's why.
Overabundance of fans that are stealing fights. Yeah, piracy is an issue, and so are pain-in-the-ass fighters.
It all creates a vicious cycle that leads us here.